At 2100 hours, the American representative proposes the use of thermonuclear weapons against Mr. Estevez's head. The proposal is rejected due to the population density at Mr. Estevez's location and the difficulty of evacuating London within the time frame provided. At 0500 hours, the American representative proposes the use of thermonuclear weapons for the third time. He is asked to leave the committee. It's that time again, ladies and gentlemen. It's Friday. It's recap day here at SCP Cafe. This is 2019, week 28. I'm your host, Blue Soul, SCP Wiki moderator, chat operator, subreddit moderator, author, loving husband, dog petter, Cologne aficionado, Tottenham Hotspur supporter. What else have I got today? I'm not sure. I'm not thinking too well. It's really hot out. Let's throw out there, pro wrestling fan and Rocket League Platinum 3. Alright, good enough. Anyway, we are just about down to the wire for CollabCon. Voting ends this Sunday night on the 14th. The 15th at 12:01 a.m. It is done, and we will have some winners. So I will be doing a special CollabCon recap show. I'll be talking about each of them at least a little bit, and, just kind of go over all of them. There were some really cool entries, some really ambitious work put out in a very short amount of time, so that was really cool to see. The only CollabCon works not planning on being present in that recap show will be the ones that are in the deep dive that was just released on Wednesday for everyone of SCP-4406 and UIU File 2017-102. That was mine and AIS Mallard's entries for CollabCon. Not going to win by the voting tallies as they stand, and probably not going to win, barring... Well, you know what? It's not going to win. The stuff that would have to happen for it to actually win would be highly, highly suspicious, and I want no part of it. The quality at the top was absolutely outstanding this contest, and I don't mind losing to such great work. But the deep dive goes into all of the thought process, into different pieces and elements of the story. It is available on all the usual platforms and was released on Wednesday. And just to make sure you're aware, the YouTube channel has what I would call the definitive version of this deep dive. You can get to it from scp.cafe. There's a link to YouTube along the top. On the subreddit r/SCP Cafe, there is a link as well. Patrons did get that deep dive episode 1 week early, and that is available for as little as $1 early access to all bonus content. In addition, there are discount codes available for the SCP Cafe store. There's the ability to submit questions for the weekly mailbag. At the $25 and $50 tiers, there are free welcome kits with vinyl decals, pins, badges, even t-shirts available to you. And speaking of the store, things have been a little flat. Haven't had a whole bunch of orders come in lately. Take a look. If there's something you don't see that you think should be there, definitely, get a hold of me. Let me know. If you have no other way of getting a hold of me, I think a number of people listening to this do know how to get a hold of me through either the wiki chat or private messaging. You can shoot me an email as a last resort at bluesoul@scp.cafe and let me know what I'm missing. And if I agree with you and I'm missing it and I can make it happen, I'll send it to you for free. How about that? So, anyway, week 28, very strange week. This is the first week since I started doing these recap shows late December last year, where out of all of the articles that were surviving up until Selection Day, every one of them was in scope. I didn't have any in the negatives, and I didn't have any that were subject to contests. So 14 surviving, 14 in scope, with a long boy of the week to go into as well. So let's get into it. SCP-4766, titled My Beautiful, Beautiful Son by Malice Aforethought. So there is an image, and the placement of it is just a little different than most articles. It is parallel to the description rather than up at the very tip top of the thing, and it is a wooden box, maybe 3 feet wide by a foot tall by a foot deep, and it's got some looks like rivets sort of hammered in with metal around the edges, and then what looks like bone or ivory along one side, and it is sort of split along 2 rows of 6 columns, and inside each of these little cells are 2 little humanoids along the top, and 2 maybe animals along the bottom on all but one of them. So it's an interesting little thing to look at. The item number, they are doing this thing I've mentioned before, where instead of the little pound sign, they have numero. I don't know. I think it's a silly change for not a lot of honest payoff, and it just sort of it invites some criticism you wouldn't normally get. Ditto, instead of object class, it has anomaly class. So this is the sort of thing that Malice is a long-standing writer. They can do this sort of stuff, and the work is probably strong enough to carry it. But it's still going to get people that are not fans of making those changes for no good reason. Furthermore, the anomaly classes are esoteric classes. We had Euclid-Nuntii, which is struck through and replaced with Euclid-Exekai. And we'll come back to that, actually, because if you know what they are, it buries the lead a little bit. So we're going to come back to it. The procedures are 2 paragraphs that it should be contained in a large containment vault at Site 90. Nobody should enter the vault outside of testing. No documents of importance are to be brought within 20 meters of it. The skip should not be removed from the vault unless Level 3 authorization is given, or unless the object itself is in clear and imminent danger. Due to the risk of a containment breach, standard material testing is currently postponed indefinitely, and circumstances that suggest the skip is and or contains an individual's son should be immediately reported to Containment Team CT-4766 Alpha. Interesting. So, circumstances that suggest it is or contains an individual's son. So, the skip is described as a decorated wooden box composed of ivory and an unidentified hardwood. Measures approximately 41 centimeters by 17 centimeters, so my eyeballing it was pretty close. It contains an unknown substance and or objects. When tilted or slightly shaken, a thick fluid can be heard moving within, accompanied by persistent rattling. The exterior is mundane, but the nature of its interior and contents is unclear. So apparently this thing can't really be opened, and the image doesn't look like there is any way to open this box either. Now, furthermore, even if you did want to open this thing and you had the means to, it's capable of short-range, instantaneous transportation and manipulation of objects and entities, including itself, and it uses this to prevent itself from being opened or to prevent any damage from occurring to it. It seems to teleport just as far as it needs to be sure it is safe and closed. It managed to go as far as 1.4 kilometers due to an incursion by a hostile forces at Site 19, and the object was transferred shortly thereafter. If it is left unattended, it will fixate on specific individuals, altering their possessions and personal effects in order to create the impression that said individual believes that the skip simultaneously is and contains their son, and it does this in a number of ways. It will place children's clothes or toys, always of a type primarily intended for a male child, on and around the box, as well as fabricating records supporting the purchase or theft of these items. Additionally, the rewriting and fabrication of personal documents to explicitly describe a parental attachment to the object, changes to diaries, journals, and work logs have all been observed. It will alter various records of the individual to include one more child than they actually have. These changes will always be constructed in such a way as to suggest that the individual themselves was making the alterations legitimately or otherwise. Also, the placement of the skip on beds or within cots, in the latter case, often displacing the cot's original occupants. So a lot of sinister stuff going on with this box. Additionally, it can and will prevent targeted people from expressing opinions contrary to the fact that it is and contains their son. Cut phone lines, damaged letters, power failures, and dental injury have all been observed. That's interesting. But infrequently and diversely enough to avoid arousing suspicions. In a minority of cases, it will orchestrate events such that those communicating with the affected people will be repeatedly distracted or preoccupied, drastically hindering communications. So this thing is going to an awful lot of trouble for an unclear motive and unclear ends. The recovery log indicates that it was recovered in 1964 from a church in England, following reports of unusual activity among the church staff. Due to the peculiarly self-concealing nature of the object's activities, it was cataloged as a filial compulsion hazard with an additional element of conscious or subconscious denial, and it remained classed as such until 1994. We developed a memetic analysis engine that showed a lack of any mind-altering effects on it. Prolonged observation and repeated testing confirmed the results, and additional investigation led to the discovery of the object's true properties. All surviving personnel amnestized, quarantined, or placed into rehabilitation due to exposure to the skip before 1994 have been issued with a formal apology as well as monetary compensation. Declassed terminated prematurely due to alleged memetic contamination have had their citizenship of home state posthumously reinstated. And we end the article right there. This is a really interesting little piece, and I had a big fridge logic moment with this, that I'm thinking like, well, I thought, well, maybe we're trying to make something out of this last bit that, oh, well, we're admitting we were wrong, and that's nice, but I started thinking about it a little more, and I needed to know what these esoteric classes were, and those are explained in the comments. That the nuntii, the one that struck through, is that it is memetic, and the latter, the exekai, is that it is capable of independent action. So what we thought it was, which was that it makes people believe that their son is inside, was replaced by the thing that it is entirely likely their son actually is inside, or has otherwise, somehow become this box. Really, really strange skip, really terrifying, honestly. It is not immediately clear what's going on in the piece, but that's not to say that it is, what's the word I'm looking for? It's not overly convoluted, and it's not that it is too subtle. It's that there is some subtlety to the piece that requires a little bit of thinking about what you're kind of taking in the, very technical language of the Foundation. We're hiding something that is quite terrifying in this piece, and I really like how this was executed on. I think one thing that may hold this back just a little bit is that it's not clear which of these elements of the story are prior to, our prior knowledge versus our current knowledge. And I think there are a couple of ways that we could have worked with this. I think what I would probably do is something along the lines of archived containment procedures or archived description and an updated description. And, it is something that we've seen before. I don't know. Maybe that's, too cliched for the time being. But that is one thing that I do think is confusing rather than subtle. And it is otherwise really solid. The tone in here is great. I've said my piece on, the little changes to the format that no, they don't break anything. They don't kill anything, any sense of enjoyment, but I find them strange nonetheless. We don't explore motives, creators, any of that at all in the piece, and I think that's okay. That is not... I don't think the piece is any worse off for it. I think, I'm interested in it, which is a credit to the piece, wanting to know more about this thing. So overall, really good piece, and +1 from me. Moving on, SCP-4819, titled Never Miss the Last Day of Summer by Hi, I'm Stell. Now, I looked that name up because I didn't immediately recognize it, thinking this was a first-timer. It's not a first-timer. This is their third piece, but it's their first one in about 2 years. They also have a Series 3 and a Series 4 piece to their name. The first thing you notice is a red on red on red box that says Notice. Due to the ongoing Temperance Principality event, and Temperance Principality is in all caps, due to that event's impact on the Foundation's standard practices and priorities, the containment procedures for this SCP have been altered in order to allocate Foundation personnel and resources where they are most necessary. Contact your site director for more information regarding the ongoing Temperance Principality event. So, this is, I guess, a way to explain why we're not up to our usual standards of containing this thing. We have an object class of safe and procedures that have been updated in 1974, that the water flowing into the skip has been redirected in order to temporarily neutralize its anomalous effect. Further containment has been deemed unnecessary. Just to the right of this, we have an image of, it looks like a little lake that you might see in the south, and it says SCP-4819 as it leads into Lake Austin. There's also a collapsible for the previous containment procedures that reads, annually on August 11th, the skip is to be cordoned off from the public under the cover story of routine cleanup of the surrounding land. Foundation personnel disguised as maintenance workers are to be stationed at the skip at this time in order to turn away any civilians attempting to enter. These personnel must not possess a high school diploma from a Travis County high school in order to prevent activation of 4819. So we have set some expectations here that we need to follow up on. And the skip is described as a swimming hole, which probably is not the tone we really want in this, pond, lake, maybe those more than swimming hole, even if, I know what that is, but I know what lots of things are that don't fit the typical Foundation tone. In any event, this swimming hole is located in Austin, Texas, spans about 450 square meters, and is it connects Panther Hollow Creek to Lake Austin. It acts as a Class 2 temporal gateway and is able to be activated annually on, and we have a strike through here. The strike through says, the day before Austin Independent School District classes begin, and what's there instead now says August 11th. And we have a footnote after that says, due to the impact of the ongoing Temperance Principality event, the Austin Independent School District is no longer operational. The last valid date of the skip's activation prior to this event was on August 11th, 2068, and has remained as August 11th ever since. So I made the assumption that those updated procedures were from 1974. They're not. They're from 2074. So we are in a little ways out from here, about, 50 or so years into the future, and we don't yet know what this event is, but it seems to be affecting not just the Foundation, but some folks outside the Foundation. The description continues. It says, only individuals that received a high school diploma from a high school located in Travis County, presumably Texas. This doesn't actually specify, but since we are talking about Austin, I'm going to make the assumption. So only those high school grads from Travis County, Texas are capable of activating the skip, and it cannot be activated more than once per individual. Activation occurs when one of these qualified individuals fully submerges themselves in its water. Once this happens, they will disappear. They're transported then to a parallel timeline, temporally manifesting as they were on the day before they begin the final year of high school in both location and physicality. The timelines generated by the skip uniformly differ from baseline reality, and they lay out some bullet points as to how they differ. The subjects will retain their memories of events that took place in their previous reality. After the time of their arrival, these memories appear to gradually vanish. We spend a little bit of time here explaining this piece that probably isn't super necessary, because we have a footnote saying the exact rate is unknown and theorized to possibly vary between subjects. That doesn't say anything at all and can be omitted. We got that through saying they appear to gradually vanish. Additionally, it says this memory loss can be circumvented through various methods of notation. However, that also doesn't really bias anything and could probably be omitted. Second, in all generated timelines, a spontaneous meeting with the subject is arranged by an individual or group considered personally important to them, taking place at this swimming hole on the day of their arrival. These meetings can be declined or avoided without issue, though all subjects who have attended them describe them as pleasant or otherwise positive. And third, the skip does not possess anomalous properties and is not contained by the Foundation in these generated timelines. So we're laying out a few things that are in danger of being where I say we're answering questions that weren't asked, but they're not quite there. I think for the most part they're valid and are things that when you're describing this timeline, I think they do make sense to include. So they will remain in that timeline until they reach the exact point in time that they activated the skip. At this point, the subject will remanifest in the baseline reality, appearing on one of the landmasses surrounding the swimming hole about 3 to 6 seconds after their disappearance. So they get submerged and find themselves in this alternate timeline the day before they start senior year of high school, and live in this alternate timeline up until they find themselves back going into submerge themselves. So that's interesting, and explains why we say they can't do this more than once. It goes on to say subjects will be clothed in whatever they were wearing in the timeline prior to their return, retain any objects they had on their person at that time, and they will manifest even if they have expired at any point in the timeline. The latter wasn't expanded on in the work, which it's like, I think you should either do something with it or get rid of it. It's kind of a Chekhov's gun thing. And the fact that they'd be clothed in whatever they were wearing, I guess if you want to write it that way, I wasn't really thinking about that. I wasn't honestly terribly interested in it, and it's not all that important to the piece itself. We have some testing logs of three test logs here and an incident log below that. The first test log here is in the year 2064 and involves a D class with a 6-digit D designation. And basically, nothing much happens in it. It works exactly as we have laid out in the previous works, and it made me think that this thing really should have something in the vein of a discovery log, because we have postulated a bunch of things without any clear indication as to how we came to obtain this knowledge, and we don't go back and explain that at any point in the work. The second test is almost 3 years later, in 2067, and involves a D-class with a 7-digit designation. And we note that when briefed on the properties of the initial meeting, the subject was unable to think of any individuals she would consider to be personally important at the time that would meet with her. And upon arriving, she received a message from an individual that she had previously sold drugs to, asking to meet at the swimming hole, complied and met with this person. They conversed about various topics, their struggles with drug addiction and coping with loss. The subject couldn't recall specific details past those topics, but described the meeting as eye-opening, and it's to be noted the subject returned to baseline reality without symptoms of opioid withdrawals she had previously possessed. So we're doing something interesting here, with that they have the opportunity to sort of do things again and maybe live a better life in this alternate timeline, and then they come out and actually have that sort of persist and stick with them, which I think is something that a lot of people want, and think, particularly thinking about that sort of point in their lives, like if I could do it over, I would do this differently, I would do that differently. I certainly got my own things along those lines that I would want to do. And I think that's kind of what we're putting out there as the main point of the narrative of this piece. So the third and final test log in here involves an Agent DeVarga, a member of a black boxed MTF that in parentheses says now defunct, with a footnote again saying that because of this Temperance Principality event, we no longer use D-Class for testing. It's been suspended entirely to allocate Foundation resources where they're most needed. This agent actually volunteered to be a test subject for this. We note that this agent had lost their right arm in a car accident 20 years prior to the test, so we instructed him to avoid the events leading up to the accident in that timeline. So they remanifested with no signs of dismemberment. They got their arm back. Shortly after manifestation, however, the subject pulled a makeshift device out of his pocket, which data expunged once activated. This rendered containment staff unconscious, allowing for the agent's escape. Their whereabouts are unknown. His capture has been deemed a low priority. This is out of left field, and it's a stylistic choice I don't really agree with. This doesn't do anything really because we've explained nothing about what the device is, how I should feel about it. Why were they going to contain him anyway? What was he running from? Doesn't sound like they were in any real trouble in the first place. So I don't know what to make of this test at all. We go to an incident log 4 years prior to that, 4 years after that test in 2074, August 11th. An individual previously employed by the Foundation was able to activate the skip despite the current containment procedures. Containment staff, which was down to one person after all of the other containment staff members had been moved, didn't attempt to stop them. An impromptu interview was held prior to activation, which was captured on nearby security cameras. We have an interview log, and this closes out the skip. It is quite lengthy in dialogue. So this interview is between Carol Navarez, who is a former Level 2 researcher assigned to a black-boxed SCP, and Dr. Rhodes, who is the current person in charge of containing this swimming hole. And the Level 2 researcher was fired not because, as Rhodes deduced, that they were planning on using SCP Black Box against the Principality, and Navarez agrees, I was opposed to it, but that wasn't the reason I got fired. I was deemed as, and gets cut off and says, personnel not essential to combat the ongoing Temperance Principality event, right? So we do a lot with, we're introducing a lot of different things and not really following up on any of them. I think it hurts this piece. They don't really go back to make any further mention of that. They're, sitting, chatting, talking about the swimming hole, and eventually they get to the point. Navarez finally comes clean and says they're going to activate this skip. They want to forget about a lot of things, what happened to their father, and Sybil and Sal, which is apparently the birth name of our black boxed skip. And Rhodes says, I understand. Are you ready? Do you want to wait a little longer? And Navarro starts coming up with all the stuff they're going to do in this alternate timeline. Never get involved with the Foundation. Maybe try and convince you not to join either. Oh, but do let them know about the Principality so we don't have a repeat of all this. I think I know the right anonymous channels to go through for that. Don't hook up with Kincaid. Treat my mom better. And thinks about it and points at one of the houses bordering Lake Austin and says, that house right there. Do you like it? And Rhodes says, yeah, it's nice. And Navarro says, tell you what, I'm going to buy it, and we're going to live in it, you and me. And so they laugh, and Navarro says, well, this is it, I guess. And Rhodes says, no, it's not. After you're done with it all, I'll be right here waiting for you, and we're going to live in that house, just like you said. I promise you. Just don't die, please. And there's this moment between the two of them where Rhodes says, my old man was right. I do regret dropping out. And they embrace, and tell each other they love you. And Navarez goes into the water, and Rhodes says, "Please don't die," and then manifests 3 seconds later in civilian plain clothes. Now, the trouble with that is that we've already established that they should be dressed in whatever the hell they were in when they went in, and we're contradicting that here. Or if we're not, we didn't really make any mention of it earlier on in the piece. So, says, yeah, I'm fine, at best 15 years of my life. Rhodes notes Navarez's scar is gone, and it says they remember just enough. And Navarez says, is anyone living in that house nowadays? And Rhodes says, I don't think anybody's lived in this area for a while now. And Navarez says, you do remember what you promised me before I left, right? He says, Carol, that wasn't even a minute ago. Of course I remember. He says, I know, just making sure. We end the log, and after this event, Dr. Rhodes submits her resignation from Foundation duties, which was accepted without issue, despite her breach of containment protocol. They were not amnestized due to a higher focus on combating the ongoing Temperance Principality event. Alternative containment procedures were implemented in the wake of her absence as well, with her being the last person on guard duty. Further action against Rhodes and Navarez has been deemed unnecessary. End article. So this is not an easy +1. This actually takes a lot of deliberation for me, because it does a number of things right, but it does a number of things that I really have to question. We open up a lot of different little things, and we don't give any of them the real depth of explanation, and the result is that I have no investment in any of them. This Temperance Principality event should be something that explains a dead or dying foundation, or possibly more. It could be a dead or dying world that there should, we come back to it a bunch, and I don't know how much it really buys the piece, which, given the ramifications of it, it should be a huge part of this piece, because it doesn't exist really in most other articles. A lot of time spent addressing questions that weren't really asked of the piece, and I'm not sure. This was a good work that was a little bit of focused writing away from being a great work. I like the core ideas here, and I like, telling the story that they're telling, which is, if you had the chance to go back and do it all over again. But the execution is flawed in a few places. This is still a +1 for me, but it does have issues that I think should really be addressed. And all in all, I think the thing is just a little lacking in terms of the tone and the brevity. I think could both be improved just a little bit. It is still a +1 though. Moving on, SCP-4056, titled Nuclear Family Unit, and this was a co-write between Captain Kirby and Uncle Nicolini. Now, the first thing that I noticed pulling this piece up is right below the title, Canon Hub, End of Death Hub, SCP-4056. I am an admitted End of Death fanboy. Now, I will say, End of Death doesn't actually play a huge role in this. It is important to the work, but it's not what the work's about, if that makes sense. It's sort of a secondary part that explains some of the motivations of the characters in it. We have an image of, I believe, McMurdo, the labs at McMurdo Station at the South Pole in Antarctica. The caption simply reads, SCP-4056, object class of Euclid, and 2 sentences worth of procedures. Foundation personnel are to be stationed outside of the skip to amnestize any civilians who encounter the anomaly. Select humanoids within the skip have been transferred to be contained at Site 17. See Addendum 2 for details. The skip is described as a facility located in northern Alaska. It contains approximately 550 different humanoids in cryogenic stasis chambers. Each of these humanoids varies from each other slightly in appearance, but genetic analysis shows their DNA is identical to that of director Charles Ogden Gears. Dr. Gears, Skip, and there's a lot of them. The stasis chambers appear to be powered by harnessing the cold temperatures and turning the lack of heat into an energy source. Now, the two authors here were already sort of taken to task for this in the comments. The technology used to do this is not well understood and theorized to be anomalous in nature. Now, that doesn't make a ton of sense. And, harnessing cold doesn't really do it for me. And honestly, I don't think the energy source for the stasis chambers really needed to be anomalous. The response to you don't harness cold. Like, cold is the absence of energy, the absence of heat. It's almost as if it was anomalous, which I'm going to say is a fairly lazy hand wave. I don't think it needed to be said at all. In fact, that sentence could be removed and nothing really changes with the skip. Just remove it, and what you have is that each chamber is branded with a logo that resembles Prometheus Labs, except for a few key differences. Foundation contacts at Prometheus confirmed that it's not theirs. They don't have any technology capable of harnessing energy from the cold as these machines have. The skip contains a single furnished room that contains a bed, change of clothes, a refrigerator with an apple and a single jar of strawberry jam in it, and a nightstand with a lamp and a picture of a man resembling Dr. Gears at age 34 with a woman resembling his wife. So that's our description, and that's an interesting little aside at the end there. We have an incident log, April 5th, 2049, POI 4056, infiltrated Site 17 through unknown means. They were first detected by Foundation security systems at 2102 outside Dr. Gears' office, and the following interaction was recorded between them. Now, if we're going to, I guess having our first POI here, I guess it makes sense to call them POI 4056, but introducing them out of the blue like that, it did throw me for a loop on first read. So our POI manages to get into Site 17 and opens Dr. Gears' door, and Gears and Clef are there. And Clef says, "Oh, come in, we're not in a meeting, just two old men shooting the breeze." Gears notes that janitorial services were over at 6, and she doesn't have a badge. She's not a member of Site staff. So stands up after activating a silent alarm. Clef produces a gun and stands. And says, "Who are you?" The POI says, "How are you still awake?" And Clef points his weapon at her. She checks her pockets and then puts her hands at her hips. Says, "Damn it, I even triple-checked." And Gear says, "Though I don't believe we've met, you seem oddly familiar." She says, "Whatever, doesn't matter. Come on, I'm getting you out of here." And he goes, "I do not intend on leaving this office." She said, "I would ask nicely, but it's never worked before. But please, 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 please." Takes a step towards the Gears and Clef, holding a rope, which she's just manifested in her hand. And Clef gives her a warning, says, "No, don't come any closer." And she replies, "Alto, please, just this once." Clef says, "I never told you my name," and shoots her in the arm, and disappears in a flash of green light. And Clef says, "Didn't take you for the kind to leave broken hearts behind, Charlie. Ex-lover of yours?" And Gears isn't happy. Says, "No, we have an incident report to file." And Clef says, "We? Hell no. You can file the paperwork. I've got game to hunt." And Gear says, "I would like to accompany you." And Clef laughs and says, "Never thought you'd have it in you. Well, let's get going. Are you a shotgun man or more of an AR guy?" And Gear says, "Neither, I'm afraid." So we add the POI to the Foundation registry. Mixed race, female, thaumaturgically capable, and possesses detailed information on the Foundation and several members of its personnel, and they were tracked to this station in Alaska. We located them by following the tracker that was lodged in them, and we called it a tracking round, which apparently is a bullet with The round actually includes some sort of transponder or GPS or something along those lines. So we find this place, and once we could no longer detect the POI present, we check it out, and we find all of these different Dr. Gearses. We're not sure what the hell we're looking at here. One has a blue colored bioluminescent brain. One speaks in incomprehensible bird-like squawks. One has a body of an amorphous mass and expressed overwhelming pain upon the deactivation of its pod. One is genetically identical to Dr. Gears but shares no personality traits and is in possession of a starburst cut ruby ring, which it wears on its right ring finger, and that is a link to 963. So that's presumably Jack Bright. And one lacks a physical body and appears as a brain in a jar, but behaves and speaks similar to our baseline Gears. One appears similar but moves stiffly and speaks in non sequiturs, and closer examinations indicate it is a robot with a presumably faulty AI. And one is no anomalous properties whatsoever and is deemed closest to our baseline Dr. Gears. That one is in Site 17 confinement. We have a few more addenda here. The latter, the one closest to baseline Gears, was awoke from cryostasis because it appeared to be one of the instances that was closest to baseline. We already established that. That seems a little redundant. But we have an interview between the two Gearses here. The two Gearses are overall very polite to each other, and the not our Gears indicates that it is our Gears' daughter. And Gears says, I must correct you. I can assure you whoever kidnapped you was not my daughter. Other Gear says, is this not your home dimension? And he replies, she did not come from here. We don't know where she came from yet. And other one replies, regardless, she's still Allison. And talk a little bit more and says, she's not my daughter, likely not yours either, but someone like us. I know that I raised my Allison to be honest with her parents. And there's some silence, some note-taking going on. We ask, Gears asks other Gears, have you interacted with any other individual sharing her identity? No, just Allison. Yes. You trust her? My daughter would not lie to me. Yours? There's a pause. She would not. Then we're in agreement. That will conclude this interview. So, following that, Dr. Gears authorized Operation Icebox, which involved MTF Alpha 99 fridge raiders led by Clef and Gears, stationed at this station in Alaska in an attempt to ambush and capture this POI. September 8th, 2049, she appears and the operation commences. This operation does not immediately go well, as two MTF agents are taken down pretty quickly, collapsing as if frozen. Finally, she comes face to face with Gears, and she says, what the hell, you never go out in the field, what are you doing here? He goes, I've alerted our forces on location, they will arrive shortly. I suggest you immediately surrender yourself. She goes, whatever, you coming here saves me a bunch of time. I don't have a lot of time to explain, but if you just trust me on this, I can explain later, and gets cut off. So I'm afraid that I refuse to go quietly. And she says, well, I'm not surprised you'd say that. You don't carry weapons on you, so it'll be hand to hand. I'm stronger and faster, so I'll get the better of you. We've done this before. You've never come out on top. Gear says, I have never done this before. She says, other yous have. She raises her hand towards Gears, who draws a stun gun. Gear says, I am not them. And she goes, you wouldn't shoot me. Your own daughter, would you? And Gears aims at her. Says, my daughter, you are not Allison. I'm certain of this. And she goes, I might not be her exactly, but I am Allison. Please, just listen to me. Gears hesitates, lowers a stun gun. She says, I'm begging you. I can explain everything later, but for now, I need you to work with me. Alpha 99 is approaching. And she says, please, I just want to... Alpha 99 enters. Gears raises the stun gun again, training it on her. She goes, Dad? Gears fires, and then immediately drops the stun gun. She's staggered and tries to escape, but falls. Alpha 99 seizes and constrains her. Gears is not happy. He goes, shit. And refused to comment on the interaction. records indicate that Gears' daughter, Allison, died in a car accident with her mother in December of 2019. Now, we're 30 years removed from that in this event. So our final addendum here is an interview between Gears and this POI, this Allison. And Gears says greetings, and she says, "Hi, Dad." Gears says, "Why do you call me this?" She says, "Out of all the different multiverses, you don't change all that much. The version of you from my universe has a little more hair on his head, but that's the biggest difference. I guess it just feels the same." Gears says, "I would appreciate it if you refrained from referring to me as a family member." And she says, "Fine. You have questions, I assume?" She says, "Why did you attempt to capture me?" She says, "To save you." He goes, "Save me from what?" She goes, "I don't fucking know. There's so much terrible shit that goes on here that I could be saving you from. Being lobotomized, spending eternity in a nightmare slumber, probably something else." Gears says, "You were not saving me from a known threat?" And she goes, "No, there was nothing known." Gears says, "And I infer from this that the facility we found in the north was where you gathered other versions of me that you saved?" And she goes, "Yes. Well, I didn't gather them all myself. I had help." He goes, "From other versions of you?" She goes, "Yes." He goes, "Why are you trying to save versions of me?" He goes, "What kind of question is that?" He goes, "I do not understand what vested interest you have in keeping me alive or any other versions of me alive. If they are as similar to me as you say, they most likely lived lives detached from you." And she goes, "I mean, you're not wrong, but like, it's more than just that." He goes, "Could you elaborate?" She goes, "I don't want you to die, or something worse. I've saved other versions of you from being locked up inside their own head, unable to communicate with the rest of the world. Another one I saved from being enslaved by a world of mutants, or being digested forever in the stomach of a giant fucking bird, just suffering forever, which might happen to you now. I don't want my dad to live out his life as a brain in a fucking trash bag." He goes, "But I am not your father." She goes, "But you're still him. You still have your own Allison. I don't want to see you suffer just like how she wouldn't want to see you suffer." And he's still taking notes and says, "Actually, my daughter died with her mother in a car crash before the advent of Omega K." And she says, "Oh, I see. That's why this universe wasn't responding to our communication." Gear says, "I believe that's all I have for today." She goes, "So you're going to keep me here, right?" "Well, that's what we're supposed to do." She goes, "Your own daughter." "You are not baseline, and technically, you are not my daughter." She says, "Yeah, I guess not. It'd be foolish for me to expect much else from you anyways." He says, "Indeed. And as per standard Foundation protocol for humanoid anomalies, we'll have to build for you a social regimen with regular checkups." And she nods. He says, "As the lead on this project, that means I'll be the one performing the weekly interviews." She says, "You're coming back?" He says, "I'll see you in 7 days, Allison." End log, end article. So I really like the piece, and the reason that this is an end of death, I think, is it's implied. It's never come out and said, and you could very easily miss it. This particular iteration of the universe where people no longer die is the ideal place to stick somebody you love. The cryogenic stasis is an altogether, confusing sort of thing if they're already not going to die. But it's a sensible reason, and would also explain when she initially, I was sort of misreading the thing when she says that's why this universe wasn't responding to our communication. I thought it was a missed opportunity to explain why this end of death universe was chosen. It was more that Allison in this universe wasn't responding because she had already died. I love the piece. I don't have a whole lot beyond that to say. Allison is herself a GOI. She's known as the Black Queen and has a number of documents along those lines, which is linked from the GOI hub. This is in line with how she behaves. All the characters are in line with how they behave, and that is to the credit of Kirby and Nico here. Like I said, my only real gripe was This whole thing with the stasis chambers, how it gets the power, I don't give a rat's ass how it gets the power. It's not remotely relevant to the work, and when you shoehorn in the anomaly that doesn't make a lot of sense, harnessing the cold temperatures, it's just like it invites criticism that you could simply avoid through omission. But you compare that with all of the good things happening in this work, it's still a very easy +1. Moving on, SCP-4853, titled ampersand SCP-4853. Now, that is about the nerdiest fucking title I've ever seen, and it merits explanation, which I will do once we go over this thing. It's not a terribly long piece either. We have our item number. There's no images, by the way, anywhere in here, and that's also relevant to the piece. The item number, SCP-4853, there's a 1 like there would be a footnote, but the footnote doesn't work. We have an object class of Keter. That has a footnote, a little 2, but that footnote also doesn't work. The procedures indicate the only designation which may be applied to SCP-4853 is SCP-4853. We have another footnote. This one actually does work. And it says this prohibits phrases such as the anomaly, the object, it, or colloquial terms like skip. And that's actually the only working footnote in this piece. Other references to SCP-4853 may exist only in this document and may not exceed 10 instances. A numeric identifier for each active reference has been placed next to its first appearance. Civilians who express awareness of SCP-4853 are to be amnesticized. If needed, standard financial remediation is to be carried out. That's interesting. The description is that SCP-4853 is a metaphysical concept, we have a 3 in parentheses, with a high degree of informational inertia. That also, like, we have all these footnotes that don't do shit. So we had 2 just in that line. We have experiment logs in the addendum. That was the whole thing, by the way. We're into the addendum now. These are very terse experiment logs. They have a procedure and a result, and they involve either we'll call them 5 black box or 2-word black box, because one's got 5, like it's 5 characters. The other's 2 words. One, the first word is 3 characters. The second one is, let's see here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So we've got 5 and we've got 2-word. So our first experiment, a D-class inquires about the nature of 5 black box. Information is received but became disassociated. We don't explain what that means anywhere in this piece, actually. The second experiment goes exactly like the first. They received the information about 5 black box, became disassociated. Same D-class inquires about the nature of 2-word black box. Same result, information received but became disassociated. The fourth one, the D-class associates information from the previous tests, and a result is the reference is created. This is reference number 4. So experiment 5, Dr. Archibald classifies 2-word black box as SCP-4853. Result, reference created, number 1. D-class inquires about containment strategy for 4853. Result is reference created, lost, some information discarded. Experiment 7, we do the same thing. Reference created, number 2, some information discarded. Experiment 8, our D-class collates information about 4853. The result is the information is grouped into a reference. This is reference number 3. And in experiment 9, D-class inquires about the distinctions between 4853 and 5-letter black box. The result is that a message was received. See below. Containment procedures finalized. Note, extraneous references destroyed using amnestics. So that explains some things here. What we thought were footnotes are our references, and this lost reference is where we destroyed one using amnestics, because we received a message that says, "Hello, valued customer. You have used all your 5-letter black box quota. We have automatically deducted $350 million from your account and upgraded you to the next plan level, giving you 10 references. Don't hesitate to contact our help desk with any questions regarding your subscription." End article. So there's a fair amount of thinking involved in this piece. Um, so you have this, 1, 2, 3, 4. 4853, Keter, metaphysical concept, high degree of informational inertia. These are the four things that we figured out about it and could assign as qualities to this concept. And when we added a fifth one, we were told we've used all our quota and were automatically upgraded to a plan giving us 10 references for the low cost of $350 million. So that's it. That's the thing. And so I said I would explain the title. And this requires a little bit of programming background, and in particular, programming in low-level languages, which is more direct access to things. In a language, in any language, you have the concept of a variable. It's a thing that stores data. It stores stuff you want. And when you ask for your variable back and you want to do something with it, normally the computer will give you a copy of it. Not the original, but a copy of it so you can do whatever you want to do with it. And this is called pass by value, that you're more interested in the value of whatever was in the variable than the variable itself. If you, for whatever reason, need to work with the original copy of the variable, there are some times where you need to do this. You will normally request it via a slightly different method. And in some languages, Rust being the one in question here, you would preface the variable with an ampersand. And now you are passing by reference, which is the whole shtick here. So ampersand SCP-4853, we're passing the skip by reference on a reference-based skip. So it is nerdy enough to tickle me, and this is not going to be one, that... it's not an easy read, but I like it. You can actually piece together a fair amount on what we've figured out about it, and at least some nature of how it works. And it's solid. I actually really like this piece for being a short work. Not a super high word count, and a really interesting idea on the other side. So easy +1 from me. Before we get into our last one, Long Boy of the Week, SCP-4867, titled Wyoming Territory, 1867 to 1870 by Tufto. Now, this is actually not the first Tufto piece to acquire Long Boy status. This is a piece driven by a lot of narrative and dialogue and journal entries and so on from, as you might guess, 1867 to 1870 concerning a diamond, or what appears to be a diamond, but is a universal constant, having existed for as long as matter itself has existed. The piece goes into a 1,000-year history of this diamond, and also paints a picture of an early foundation that bears a lot of resemblance to the wild frontier, particularly out in the western United States, Montana and Wyoming. There are a lot of things left unsaid that need to be pieced together by the reader, and a twist at the end that will sort of make you question quite a lot of what you've already read. I found it to be a really compelling piece, but altogether too long for the recap show. So do give it a read. SCP-4867, Wyoming Territory, 1867 to 1870. Now, last but not least, SCP-4710, titled Sheen Gojira by a Random Day. We have no images anywhere in the work, actually, and an object class of neutralized with procedures that indicate none. The remains of Sheen Estevez are presumably in the possession of the Global Occult Coalition. Now, I'm going to admit here, I am not familiar with Sheen as a first name. I've never seen it before, so if it's not Sheen, if it's something like Shan or something along those lines, sorry, it's Sheen for the purposes of this reading. So the skip is described as a phenomenon in which the head of Sheen Estevez, who is a clerical employee of Marks and Spencer in Westminster, London, expanded from approximately 57 centimeters to over 6.4 kilometers in diameter, resulting in a BM class broken masquerade scenario. We don't do a lot of broken masquerade stuff on the main list, so I was really excited for this piece when I saw that. I wanted to see how this was going to play out. The event began July 7th, 2019, shortly after 9:15 a.m., and continued for 24 hours. During this time, his head expanded at the rate of about 0.7% per minute. His head was completely impervious to damage and unaffected by its own weight, though his body was crushed underneath his head within 8 hours. And we have a timeline here, and this is basically almost the entire piece is taken up in this timeline. So it starts out with him talking and chatting. At around 9:30, we identify this roughly as the point at which the skip began expanding. Now, there's a little bit of a gripe I have, which is that this sentence reads, SCP-4710 began expanding. We describe 4710 as the phenomenon, and it's kind of, it's clunky language. Like, I don't know what the best way to say that is. Maybe 4710 should just be the anomalous head? I don't know. But when we have to go back and refer to 4710, we tend to do it in this timeline talking about the head more directly than the phenomenon itself. So I don't know. It's iffy. We get the point, obviously, but it's just one of those little perfectionist sort of things that it could do with a little bit of addressing, you know? So 2 hours later, Mr. Estevez is requesting help as his head has become stuck between the walls of the bathroom stall. He can't reach the lock, and other employees are reluctant to crawl under the partition to unlock it, so he remains stuck. Half hour later, the expansion of his head breaks the partitions apart, and his coworkers dial 999. Due to the nature of the event, the dispatchers believe the call to be a hoax. 45 minutes later, the first public video of the event is posted to YouTube. It's filmed by a coworker. It's 10 minutes long and shows Mr. Estevez sitting in the hall as his head expands. So 45 minutes pass. His head has become large enough to break through the ceiling and into the second floor. This results in an evacuation of the M&S headquarters and calls to 999 to attract the attention of both local authorities and the Foundation. A Foundation agent arrives as part of the paramedics and reports on the nature of the event. This calls for a dispatch of Pi 1 City Slickers, who go in to investigate the anomaly. Gamma 5 Red Herrings is also sent in with, and I like this passage, cauterizing the flow of information within the civilian emergency services. It's a little florid language for what we are trying to put out there, that we're trying to suppress information. Cauterizing the flow is maybe a bit too flowery, but we'll let it go and keep going here. 17:30, this is a full 3.5 hours after Pi 1 is dispatched. They arrive, and Mr. Estevez's head has expanded to 13 meters in diameter by this time. His body's been crushed by the growth, but his head continues to expand. Notably, his face has not expanded with the rest of his head. That's really sad. Because, you know, like, you're kind of thinking it's like, you know, his whole face is getting really big. No, he's got, like, you know, tiny face on a gigantic fucking head. So his cries for help 10 minutes later have degenerated to requests for death as his head threatens to break free of the building outright. Pi 1 decides to neutralize the anomaly, but they fail. Their attempts are totally unsuccessful. They fail to damage Mr. Estevez's head in any way at all. 15 minutes later, the Foundation London officer on duty decides to refocus containment on information control. Maz Hatters is dispatched to cordon off the area under the pretense of a dirty bomb threat and handle any witnesses. So we have some rising action here. 35 minutes later, Mr. Estevez's head has expanded out of the building and into adjacent city blocks. Initial news reports indicate the cover story of a dirty bomb has been temporarily successful, But a half hour later, web crawlers from the foundation began identifying videos and photographs associated with this phenomenon, and the BBC News reports that the dirty bomb story may be false and interviews one of Mr. Estevez's co-workers. So Department of Misinformation is now pivoting all available resources to work this. The GOC, a liaison from them, contacts the foundation and recommends that they withdraw from London. The foundation assets in the area report GOC operatives are encroaching on the area disguised as British military personnel. 30 minutes pass, and the true nature of the phenomenon has become apparent to the civilian populace. In addition to commenting on the nature of Mr. Estevez's predicament, global news media as well as amateur video and photographs begin to draw attention to assorted foundation personnel on the scene and suggest that a larger conspiracy may be in place. So we're in trouble. The whole head thing, that's bad, but we're seeing enough of this, different MTFs, different people associated with the foundation on scene, and now we have a bigger issue even than this. So 30 more minutes, citing the failed containment attempts, unwanted attention being drawn to the foundation, and political pressure being applied by the GOC and United Kingdom, the Overseer Council votes to pull these MTFs from London. Overseers 3 and 6 are dispatched to a committee with the Prime Minister, representatives from the National Police Chiefs Council, UN, and the GOC to work on strategies for neutralizing 4710, as well as safely evacuating London, which, because we don't know what the hell's going on, and 0.7% a minute, that's going to be a problem here in a couple of days. So this is where we have the American representative proposing the use of thermonuclear weapons against his head. For the next 6 hours, various other proposals are produced, feeding it neurotoxin, thermonuclear weaponry inserted by means of a bunker buster bomb, cryogenically freezing it from the inside. All proposals are discarded as no means of piercing his skin has proven successful, and there's no evidence that he has a body left that could be affected by poison. At 0500, the American proposes the use of thermonuclear weapons for the third time. He's asked to leave. 10 minutes later, tensions arise as 06 questions why the American representative was not expelled earlier. There's a physical altercation between the Prime Minister and Overseer 6, and both overseers are asked to leave the committee. 15 minutes later, the Foundation's British liaison informs us our presence is no longer required within London, and requests that all remaining Foundation personnel within the city immediately leave. Another 2 hours or so pass, and by this time, the exponential growth of Mr. Estevez's head has resulted in its expansion to almost 3 kilometers in diameter. Overwatch Command votes to declare a broken masquerade scenario. 8-4 and 5 against. The veil is officially broken. And at 9:35, almost exactly 24 hours later, without warning and against all prior evidence, Mr. Estevez's head explosively ruptures. The ensuing shockwave and expulsion of cerebrospinal fluid, blood, enlarged bone, and viscera levels most of Westminster and causes several 100,000 casualties, including the deaths of most of the British cabinet. 25 minutes pass. The GOC coordinates with the British Armed Forces, surviving cabinet members, and emergency workers to provide disaster relief and mitigation, and at 1200 hours, 4710, 2 hours after the GOC is involved, is declared neutralized. Well, that sucks, don't it? We have 3 sentences left in this piece. No video or satellite footage has been able to support any conclusive explanation for the sudden neutralization of SCP-4710. However, several surviving eyewitnesses reported an enormous hand with a silver pin descending from a cloud immediately prior to the explosion. Further investigation is ongoing. End article. So, this is one of these where I disagree with how this thing ended, and Ard, for his part, is okay with that. This is an agree to disagree sort of thing. What he's going for is the juxtaposition of the Python-esque absurdity and the real stark horror and terrible ramifications for the foundation of this whole event. So from that perspective, I do get it. That doesn't mean I have to like it. I feel like the piece went from a great piece to a good piece on that line, changing it from it's the whole thing was inexplicable to the sort of goofy ending that we do have. That it's now I get it to an extent that we have undergone the full Broken Masquerade scenario, and it's all because of this totally inexplicable phenomenon with an equally implausible conclusion. But in doing so, the Foundation's been totally outed. There's hundreds of thousands of deaths, and the GOC has displaced us entirely in the United Kingdom, which is terrible news for us. The consequences overall could be really, really severe. We don't yet know how any of it plays out, and I like that about the piece. Now, there was a call out in the SCP Cafe chat about this skip in some of the tie-ins between this and Shin Godzilla, the 2016 release, where Godzilla is basically allowed to become far more powerful than they would have otherwise been due to bureaucratic governmental bureaucracy and inefficiency. And there's some analogs to that in this work where we go for, and I misspoke earlier, I said 6 hours. This is from 9 p.m. to 5 a.m., so a full 8 hours where we don't do anything. We propose things. We don't try them. We just propose them for 8 hours. And at that rate of growth, this went from, bad to totally, unsustainable. Like, totally nothing we can fucking do, because we spent so much time talking about things we could do and not even seeing if they would work. And I think that's highly intentional in this piece, that we discard all the proposals, everything that we could have come up with and tried. We just toss all of them out. So after 8 hours, we accomplish absolutely nothing. And this just causes, escalation from within this committee, and it's a whole big fucking mess. And we didn't do anything to try and actually right the situation over that course of time. Really, Pi 1 is the only one that tried anything at all. The build up to Broken Masquerade here was, I think, really well put together. It's, like I said, it's something we don't see very often, particularly in the main list. And even though we have the Broken Masquerade canon, the origins of Broken Masquerade in that canon are well established. So this was, a unique sort of thing. You don't get to see it happen all that often. And I'd like to see more of it. I like to see these sorts of alternate interpretations of what might happen in a scenario where, are you going to fucking amnestize everyone on the planet? Probably not. The options at that point are really minimal, and particularly if you've got the entire world aware of you and actively disliking you. It is not good news. Not good news at all. And all in all, I love this piece. It has silly moments in it, but overall, like, when you stop and think about what's being presented, it's really terrifying on a number of levels. And I will begrudgingly give the very, very silly ending a pass and give this a very hearty +1. And that's it. That's week 28. Let's answer some mail. Christian Wright asks, what types of SCPs do you get the most enjoyment out of reading? What do you think makes SCPs rewarding to read in general? Also, do you have any pets? And if you do, can you pet them for me? So, the first question, which do I get the most enjoyment out of reading? It's a good question. This whole cafe recap thing has given me more reading than I've ever done on the wiki. I've read hundreds of pieces now that I normally wouldn't, just because staff duties, reading is about the last thing you have time for. I still really enjoy understated Series 1-esque horror. I know we're doing a lot of really cool things. There's a lot of cool narratives, but I like the pieces that can sort of challenge the notion that we've done everything there is to do in that Series 1 style and put something out there effectively. I think that at this point in time is really, really difficult because from a narrative perspective, there's an infinite number of stories to tell. And that is, I think, a significant reason for why Series 3, 4, 5, things have gone more and more in that direction of storytelling. But when somebody can sort of pointedly ignore that and give a far more simple, subtle, stark thing, man, I do love to see it, and it's rare. I'll call it out when I see it, and and I try to point out when something's Series 1 in a good way or a bad way, and the difference can be found in which tropes you use and which ones people are really tired of seeing. So that's a for sure one that I really do enjoy when they do come up. I enjoy pieces that successfully subvert my expectations right at the very end of the piece. That's a vague sort of thing, but it is something that when it happens, I'm like, oh, well done. I really enjoy that when it happens. And if the question's more general, like what sort of things do I like seeing people write about, I don't really have anything that I feel that strongly about. For the most part, they're just vehicles for the storytelling and for for the horror. And I do have a pet. I have a dog. His name is Munchkin. He just turned 12 about 5 days ago, and he has 5 teeth left in his head, and none of them touch. So he comes to work with me. He has it pretty good. I will pet him for you. Matt Wenzel says, lots of people bring knowledge from their jobs and expertise to help them write skips in similar areas, like biology, retail, or IT. What are some influences that stick out at you? Having an IT background, I can pretty much always tell when somebody else also does, or when they don't. It can be pretty apparent as well. The big one I saw lately was the skip I covered back in week 24, SCP-4182, There Is No Site 5 by the Great Hippo. There's a number of things in here where there's actual Python stack traces, errors, and things that are straight out of what you would see in real life. There's plenty of times where you'll see references to things that are 100% accurate, and if you can do that without losing your reader or baffling them with bullshit, then more power to you. I think that is one of the beautiful things with the wiki is you have so many true subject matter experts that can give things a really, really believable, immersive tone because they are accurate with respect to the science that they're trying to portray. And AIS Mallard asks, what are your thoughts on meta/pataphysics articles? Are there any aspects of it that you think are underexplored? The concept in general, I have no strong feelings on. I find it to be more of a vehicle to tell a story with. I don't really we've covered pataphysics skips on Cafe in the past, and the fact that I'm not thinking of anything beyond the little spinner logo when I think of pataphysics means that the what we've laid out so far is not compelling enough that it has a real emotional attachment or some sort of really visceral response of, oh, that thing, yeah, no, I don't really have that yet. So, it's for what it is and for, what we're doing on the wiki, I have no issue with it. I just don't have a terribly strong feeling on it either. So with that, we are just about out of here. Week 29, planning on being right on schedule July 19th. Last chance this weekend to vote on CollabCon. If you haven't, take a look at the articles, make some votes, and help determine the winners. If you thought the show was worth $1, patreon.com/scpcafe. You can see the full breakdown of what your patronage does get you. Until the week 29 show, keep reading, keep writing, and I'll see you on the other side.